Oh hey, welcome to the third episode of Dapps Simplified. In this episode, we will dive into React context and their best practices while using it with Typescript. Learning the design patterns and conventions of React context in Typescript is crucial for understanding the internal workings and usage of Solana wallet adapters. So let's dive in. This video is not about when and why to use React context. Instead, it's about the best practices while using it with the Typescript and Next JS. First, we'll design a simple React Next TypeScript app, which we'll use to learn the concepts. In this sample app, we'll create a React context and a provider component to connect and share the connection to Solana Devnet with the rest of the application. Then, we'll learn about the design patterns and the naming convention for using React context in providers. We'll also touch upon the TypeScript types to be used for the context and the providers. At the end, we'll look at some tips for using React context with Next.js. Here is the state we'll be sharing with the rest of the React application using React context. Solana/web3.js comes with the connection object, which is used to connect to the JSON RPC WebSocket endpoint of the Solana network. This object needs to be shared with a lot of React components in the application to keep track of the status of the connection. Instead of drilling props or making it complex by using stores, we'll use the simple and elegant design patterns offered by React context. You might have similar use cases while trying to share a WebSocket state, wherein multiple React components in your application might need access to the state of the connection. Another good example would be to keep track of the number of seats left in a booking application, wherein multiple application screens or the pages might need access to this state for composing the app logic. Let's initiate a next TypeScript app and structure our project. So let's go to Google and find our Next.js TypeScript stacked lists template, a starter kit. So here we are in the README of the starter kit. It's got the de facto instructions that comes with any Next.js starter project. Let's look at other files. As usual, we've got the pages folder, you got the API folder, we got the underscore app.tsx and the index.tsx. Let's create a folder called src in the root of the project, and let's structure our project. Let's create two files inside src, and let's call one of them as useconnection.tsx, and let's call the other one as the connection provider.tsx. So let's quickly look into the logic behind naming these files. Let's say that the name of the state which you're trying to share using React context is called myObject. It's a good practice or nice to have a convention to separate the declaration of the context inside a file called useMyObject and myObjectProvider for defining the provider component. Let's begin by creating a context to share the connection object or the connection state for the rest of the application. In the useConnection.txt file, let's start by importing createContext from React. We've imported createContext, which is used to create a new context. Now, let's create a context called ConnectionContext. In case the object or the state we are sharing is called myObject, we would otherwise name this as myObjectContext. It's again a good convention to follow. So the context is not typed yet. At the end, we'll revisit how to type the context. Now let's create a helper function. This helper function is used to just retrieve the context from the connection context. To retrieve the value of the context or the state, we need to use React's useContext. We just need to pass the connection context to the useContext function. So right now, the context does not have any state or value. We need to implement the provider component to be able to assign some value to the context. Let's just import useContext, and there we go. We have the first version of useConnection. Now let's define the provider component. Let's open the connectionProvider.tsx file and import the connection context from useConnection.tsx. The connection context is required to implement the connection provider component. Without the provider component, there is no value or state inside the context. It's just an empty context. Now let's create a React component which implements the provider to pass value to the context. Let's name this as connection provider. Again, following the naming convention, if the state I'm passing is called my object, we would name this as my object provider. So we have the structure for our connection provider React component, and inside this, the first thing we need to do is to initialize the new connection or the state for the Solana blockchain. Since we are connecting to Solana Devnet, which is like the development environment for building Solana applications, we'll be using the URL api.devnet.solana.com. With the help of the connection object, we'll be able to easily connect to the Solana Devnet blockchain. There seems to be an error. Okay, I was missing the const keyword. Now there seems to be an issue with the connection object. Oh, we didn't import Solana/web3.js. Let's quickly do that. Let's go to the statement and import connection from Solana/web3.js. Now we have the connection object to the Solana Devnet. Let's create the context provider to pass the connection object. Without implementing the context provider and passing the value, the connection context does not have any value or state. It's just empty. Let's create connection context.provider and use the value and supply the connection object because this is the state which we want to pass using the connection context. And let's close the tag. Let's summarize what we just did. In the useConnection.txt file, we created an empty context using createContext and named it as connection context, and then initialized it by creating a provider and passing a value of the Solana connection object. Now, the connection context is initialized. Let's console log the connection object so that when we use the connection provider component, we know that we have successfully initialized the connection object and connected to the Solana Dev network. Open index.tsx and let's remove all the boilerplate markup that came while initializing the next Typescript project. Let's just keep a simple div. Now, let's import the connection provider. We have to use the connection provider component to initialize the connection object. So let's import connection provider from connectionprovider.tsx in the src folder. Let's begin by using the connection provider component and see if it creates the connection. Got the connection provider component and the closing tags. There we go. That's the component, and here's where we have defined the provider. Guess everything looks all right. Let's go to index.tsx and save the file. Looks like we haven't imported the Solana/web3.js package. Let's go to the package.json and let's add the import for Solana/web3.js. I don't think the core library might change in the future, so let's add the latest version. We're set. Let's see if this successfully initializes the connection. We'll see the console log if it works perfectly. Looks like it's working well. Yes. Now we could see the connection object and we have successfully connected to the Solana blockchain or the Solana Dev network. We have also passed the value along with the connection provider so that this can be sent to the child React components. Hope you all liked the video, but the best part is still in the next episode where we will define the children component and retrieve the connection object using React context. We will also learn how to define types for the React context and also for the connection provider component. We will learn about the best practices while using React context with Next. At the end, we'll look into how to use the connection object and retrieve the information like the number of blocks and also the block height, print that on the screen. Till then, keep learning and subscribe to the channel. See you all.